WWE SmackDown in 2002 had no business being as good as it was, and much of that was thanks to Paul Heyman in the SmackDown Six. 6 wrestlers having matches on SmackDown TV and giving the big boys on Raw a real run for their money. SmackDown was written by a creative madman who had just been given enough rope to either build something special or hang himself with it. And what this creative madman and the SmackDown 6 built together across the second half of 2002 is still, to this day, one of the best stretches of weekly TV in WWE history. Let's get stuck in and let's take a closer look at the SmackDown 6. Our tale begins all the way back in the spring of 2002, just after the ill-fated Invasion storyline. The Invasion left WWE with a lot of guys, and their roster was now in danger of being way too bloated. The company had taken up so much talent after WCW and ECW folded that they now had more wrestlers than they had screen time for. And along with this, you gotta imagine the creative team were also feeling the pressure due to needing to give all these guys something to do on TV. To fix this problem, WWE introduced the brand split, and the idea behind the brand split was pretty good. Raw and SmackDown would become 2 separate brands with different rosters, eventually different championships, and this is the key part when it comes to our video today. Raw and SmackDown would have 2 separate creative teams. The WWE would have 2 different shows trying to outdo one another, which was also a way to sort of recreate the magic of the Monday Night War. Though this time the WWE weren't going to compete against another company, they were going to compete against themselves. Thing is, during this time period, SmackDown was still viewed as the secondary show. Raw had legacy, Raw was always the flagship. The Red brand was a weekly live broadcast where storylines got much more progression. So right from the get-go, it felt like the SmackDown brand was at a disadvantage simply due to how it was perceived as a supplementary TV show. The brand split, according to Paul Heyman, was also put in place because UPN weren't happy with the numbers SmackDown was bringing in. So this wasn't strictly about recreating the magic of the late 90s with 2 companies going head to head. It was, according to Paul Heyman, much needed to shake things up for the SmackDown TV show itself. Heyman said, SmackDown was in serious trouble. It was relegated to being the B show, even by internal WWE standards. Dean Valentine at UPN was strongly considering not renewing the show. SmackDown was in peril, if not a cancellation, a non-renewal. Something had to be done to save that brand. So you've got a show that the network's unhappy with, a show that the company itself had allowed to become secondary, and to add to the problems, once the draft was complete, some would view the SmackDown roster as not being as strong as the Monday Night roster. Sure, SmackDown did have key main event talent like The Rock and Hulk Hogan, but Rock was going Hollywood, Hogan was going to work limited dates, so something had to give. WWE had the talent pool for sure, SmackDown was in need of a big shake-up, and this is where Paul Heyman comes in. Paul Heyman needs no introduction to anyone watching this video, but just for context, this is a dude who spent years running ECW on a really tight budget. He built a company that really did change the direction of the entire wrestling industry, especially in the United States. ECW's influence on the Attitude Era, the era that helped WWE win the Monday Night War, is well documented. But remember too that Paul was also responsible for showcasing many of WCW's key talents, such as Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit, to name a few. Heyman knew a lot about taking risks, and much of that was thanks to Paul's history with ECW. So in many ways, Paul was the perfect man to lead SmackDown during this new era for the show. Heyman's whole philosophy around booking was pretty simple. Find out what a wrestler does well, put that to the forefront, and try not to expose stuff a wrestler may be bad at. Not exactly revolutionary, I'm sure you'd agree, but it does make perfect sense. We'll come back to this a bit later on, but by July 2002, Heyman joined SmackDown's creative team as its lead writer, and things were going to be a lot different for folks tuning into the Blue brand. You gotta keep in mind too that Heyman was also answering to Vince McMahon, and Vince had his own opinions on what WWE fans wanted to see. Remember throughout all of this that Heyman was doing what he could do within the confines of Vince McMahon's WWE, which, let's be honest, probably wasn't the easiest thing to do, especially if you're the kind of person who likes to go against the grain. Though that being said, he got the job for a reason, and I'd like to think McMahon knew what he was getting himself into when he gave Paul E this pretty important job. Anyway, the SmackDown 6 story really begins when Raw's creative team approached Paul looking for one of his SmackDown superstars. Raw wanted Y2J Chris Jericho, and Paul saw this as an opportunity to build his own roster with a trade. Jericho was a proven main event performer, a former undisputed champion, and anyone would want Y2J on their television show. Most would think letting Jericho go to Raw would be a bad move, especially considering that SmackDown needed all the big name talent it could get, but instead of Heyman viewing Jericho's departure as a loss, he saw it as an opportunity. If Raw wanted Y2J, then Heyman wanted two Raw stars in return, and the names he wanted were Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. Both men were being underutilized on the Raw brand. It seemed like the writers on Raw weren't investing in these two names, or perhaps they had just forgotten about them. And this was maybe proven when everyone laughed at Heyman for wanting these men on his squad. Paul said on the Talk Is Jericho podcast, "When Raw took Jericho and in exchange I said I wanted Benoit and Guerrero, everybody laughed at me. To them, these were NWO's whipping boys. Now I got Benoit and Guerrero on the show so that I can team Edge up with Rey, I can team up the Guerreros together, and I can make Benoit and Angle my shooter tag team that doesn't belong." The WWE creative head honchos, the very people whose job it is to identify and develop talent, looked at Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and they laughed. NWO's whipping boys? Come on, man. Heyman certainly didn't see Guerrero and Benoit as whipping boys. He saw two of the most talented workers in the world who just needed someone to actually showcase them. And so the deal went through, and by August 2002, both Benoit and Guerrero were on SmackDown. Heyman now had his pieces in place, and I'm sure he also had a chip on his shoulder after the trade negotiations. He had something to prove, and he knew Eddie and Benoit could deliver. So you gotta hand it to Paul E. The man most definitely had a plan. With Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit now on the SmackDown roster, the Blue brand now had its SmackDown 6. I should also probably point out that the group were never referred to as the SmackDown 6 on TV, and it wasn't until years later that the internet named the group as such. These guys were never marketed as the SmackDown 6, it's something they were named long after the era. Time then to answer the question, who were the SmackDown 6 and what was their purpose? Well, the men included in this group were Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Edge, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero and Chavo Guerrero, and while they would all work against each other in singles matches, they also consisted of three pairs, Eddie and Rey, Los Guerreros, and the unlikely team of Angle and Benoit. Each person had their own identity and each guy was capable of carrying a match from any position on the card. So this in turn would lead to some interesting match bookings when it came to SmackDown TV. The reason this grouping worked as well as it did and the concept behind the SmackDown 6 is something Edge talked about on the Kurt Angle podcast back in 2021. Talking about the tag team work that the SmackDown 6 were able to build together, Edge said, "When we started that idea of the SmackDown tag titles, I knew with those six talents, and I'm sure Paul thought this as well, I can mix and match every week. No matter what mix or match it is, they're gonna crush it. Whether it's Eddie and Edge one week, and Benoit and Rey, or Angle and Chavo, and then flip them the next week, and then flip them again. I mean, there are so many scenarios, so much fun." Right, let's break down each member of the SmackDown 6. First up, it's Kurt Angle, an already established main event player before the brand extension. He's an Olympic gold medalist, a man who adds credibility, and one hell of a pro wrestler to boot. When it came to promos, Angle was simply fantastic. He could do comedy, brilliant, ridiculous, self-aware comedy, and he could also deliver serious, intense promos that relied on his legitimacy as an ass kicker. He could work with anyone on the roster and he'd always deliver, so putting Angle in this little group is a no-brainer. Chris Benoit brought the goods when it came to in-ring action. There was no pandering to the fans, whether he was a heel or a babyface, no playing to the camera or the crowd to get himself over. Benoit went out there and wrestled like every match was a real fight, and the way he wrestled really spoke for him, kinda making up for his shortcomings on the microphone by being one of the most intense wrestlers who ever stepped into a WWE ring. Heyman paired Benoit with Angle as a tag team. Two guys who were extremely proud and extremely competitive, yet they couldn't stand one another. But they were forced to cooperate to get championships that they both believed they deserved. I also feel like I have to point something out, and you guys who watch Reliving the War already know the deal, but for those who didn't watch, discussing this time frame or any time frame with Chris Benoit included is complicated due to what he did to his family, and what he did will always be inexcusable and unforgivable in my book. I really don't care how good of a pro wrestler he was. Nothing about this video or any Benoit video on this channel is intended to minimise what Chris did, but that being said, and when it comes to this upload, Chris Benoit was a key piece of the SmackDown 6 and his in-ring work during this specific period, like it or not, was extremely good. We then have Edge, who benefited a lot from the SmackDown 6 era. He had been in the WWE, or WWF, since 1998. He had had tag team success, he had won the Intercontinental Championship twice, he looked the part and he had natural charisma, but he wasn't where he needed to be in terms of moving up the cards. He was good, no doubt about it. His work with Christian during the Attitude Era and beyond was fantastic, but he still hadn't broken out as a big singles performer. It was during the SmackDown 6 era, I believe, where Edge truly broke out. Heyman booked Edge in a singles feud with Eddie Guerrero, and the matches they had turned out to be Edge's proving ground. They fought at SummerSlam in August 2002, again at Unforgiven in September, and then they had an ODQ match on SmackDown taking place on the 26th of September that fans still call one of the best TV matches in SmackDown history. Seriously, go check it out. It isn't hard to find, though I'm unsure if a cut of the match was ever released that didn't have commercial breaks. I know it's on one of Edge's match compilation DVDs, but I'll need to double check it. The Edge vs Eddie Guerrero matches were good, but maybe more importantly, the matches Edge had with Latino Heat seriously helped him when it came to looking like a genuine main event level performer. Rey Mysterio debuted on SmackDown in July 2002, and Heyman didn't bury Mysterio in the Cruiserweight division while hoping for the best. He put Mysterio in main event combinations right from the get-go, letting him work with Angle, Benoit, Edge and the Guerreros. And that's because Heyman knew all too well that Rey Mysterio was a special performer while also being highly marketable. It would have been easy to just throw Rey into the Cruiserweight division and have him dominate it while switching out opponents every month or so, but that's not what happened, and both Mysterio and SmackDown became better for it. While Angle and Benoit would get paired up and while Eddie and Chavo would form Los Guerreros, Rey and Edge were put together as a new team, and you could say, compared to the other tag teams, that Rey and Edge were maybe at a disadvantage. Los Guerreros knew each other very, very well. Angle and Benoit had worked against each other during the late stages of the Attitude Era, so they knew each other pretty well too. But Edge and Rey had to find their chemistry, though fortunately it didn't take too long. Edge talked about how he and Rey came up with ideas when he said, "Rey and I clicked the way we did because we'd never teamed up before, you know, and I'm like a mad scientist. I go, hey Rey, what do you think if you rolled up and I got you in a powerbomb, but I flipped you in a moonsault on the floor onto those guys?" He would say, "Okay, Edge-o." Eddie Guerrero's the heart of this whole thing for me. His journey to this point had been difficult after battling addiction and getting released from the company in 2001. He spent time on the independents trying to get his life back together, and when he came back to WWE, SmackDown was where he would eventually land thanks to Paul Heyman's trade. Paul recognised what Eddie brought to the table, and in the end, Eddie Guerrero moving to SmackDown was 100% the right call. Maybe the best thing that ever happened to Eddie Guerrero actually when we talk about his WWE career. During the SmackDown 6 days, Eddie Guerrero was incredibly entertaining. He was a heel, yet he was funny. He was sneaky, but still very charming. And his ring work was truly showcased on WWE television thanks to Heyman going back to his old booking mantra of emphasising the strong points of a wrestler. The lie, cheat and steal persona that Eddie developed over time on SmackDown just made things better. The cheeky and conniving side of Guerrero, mixed with his abilities inside the ropes, made Eddie a must-see attraction every week on SmackDown. Great promos, great comedy and great matches. What more could you ask for? Eddie's nephew Chavo Guerrero is the one member of the SmackDown 6 who definitely gets undersold when people discuss the group, and it's a bit unfair, truth be told. Many people forget that Los Guerreros worked as a team because Chavo was actually good enough to be Eddie's equal inside the ring, and their promos worked because they could bounce off each other really, really well. Never mind the fact that Chavo was a really good high flyer in his own right, and he was also really reliable. Those who watched WCW knew that Chavo Guerrero was a great performer. He, like Eddie, maybe didn't get a chance to shine in the WWE during his early days in the company, and he didn't get the opportunity to show what he could do both in the ring and on the mic. So thanks to the SmackDown 6 and thanks to Paul Heyman, all that changed. Chavito himself had an understanding of what made the SmackDown 6 so special. In a 2016 interview with Ring Rust Radio, he said, "We tried to outshine each other, not by taking the match, but by giving the match. We had 4 guys in the ring that were pretty good at the time, and then you throw in Rey Mysterio and Edge. That combo appeals to every single fan." Think about other backstage groups in wrestling and how they always come across as a bit self-serving. I mean, think about the Clique and their philosophies of working together. Seems like the guys on SmackDown had much better intentions when it came to what they wanted to do in the ring and what they wanted to achieve when competing in matches. Chavo also said this in the same interview. "We started kicking Raw's butt. I remember Michael Cole at one time was calling Raw the B show, and we got a lot of hate for that. We were supposed to be the B show, but we started kicking the A show's butt, so we were becoming the A show. Being part of the SmackDown 6 ranks up way high in my career." Speaking of kicking Raw's butt, let's talk about that for a moment, because while the SmackDown TV show was deemed as better in terms of in-ring quality during this period, the rating stuff is not as simple as what Chavo suggests. Now, when people talk about the SmackDown run, some will say that SmackDown was beating Raw every week in the TV ratings, and yeah, not quite. The ratings thing's a pain in the arse because, yeah, Raw did usually win, but the numbers aren't as simple as people make them sound. Raw actually won in the ratings 26 times, SmackDown won 6 times, and they tied 3 times. So if we're just looking at the weekly numbers on paper, Raw was still coming out ahead more often than not. Thing is, the numbers don't tell the full story. Raw was airing on TNN, which was a cable network, while SmackDown was airing on UPN, which was on free broadcast television. That matters because cable ratings and broadcast ratings weren't measured against the exact same pool of homes. This means, for example, a 3.0 on Raw and a 3.0 on SmackDown didn't necessarily mean the exact same amount of people were watching, and in some cases, SmackDown could have a lower rating yet still be reaching a pretty healthy audience. Raw also had one massive advantage though, it was live. SmackDown was taped, and remember, this was 2002. Spoilers were already all over the internet before the SmackDown show even aired, so this meant Raw had that anything can happen thing going for it, while SmackDown had, well, I already read the results on Tuesday working against it, which of course is not ideal. So no, you can't say SmackDown was battering Raw in the ratings every week because that's not really accurate. What I would say though is that SmackDown was holding its own, and creatively it was absolutely 100% giving Raw a run for its money. While the blue brand had Angle, Benoit, Eddie, Chavo, Edge and Rey going out there every week having belters, Raw was stuck in a pretty rough patch with the infamous Reign of Terror just getting underway, amongst other things. For many, Monday nights were becoming a bit of a chore unless you really liked 20-minute Triple H promos. In short, Raw was the flagship. Raw was still winning the ratings more often than not, but SmackDown had the momentum. If you put ring work above all else when it comes to pro wrestling, Thursday night was your better bet. So the blue brand wasn't just the B show anymore, and when the SmackDown 6 really got rolling, people got excited to watch the SmackDown show again. I also want to mention SmackDown being aired in the UK. Many folks here would catch this era of SmackDown on Saturday mornings through the Sky One channel. Sky One, at one time, was a decent entertainment channel thanks to the channel airing reruns of The Simpsons and Married with Children every day. Yeah, don't judge me, Married with Children was awesome. Sky One eventually came bundled with the very lowest Sky and cable subscriptions folks could buy, so SmackDown airing on Saturday mornings meant the show was now accessible to a whole lot more people who never watched WWE before. Saturday morning cartoons, for a lot of kids, was replaced by WWE SmackDown, albeit an edited version of SmackDown, and Saturday morning cartoons had become a bit crap anyway, so that was a bonus. Even young adults were checking out SmackDown before getting ready to head out to the bar to watch the Saturday football results. I'm sure many from the UK can back this up in the comment section. Right, now let's look at the actual wrestling, because for all the context, all the backstage politics and all the talk about TV ratings, the reason people still bring up the SmackDown 6 is really because of their matches. I'm only going to look at some highlights here, and there was no better display of the SmackDown 6 than the WWE Tag Team title tournament that began in October 2002. The WWE Tag Team Championship had to be created from scratch for the SmackDown brand. Raw kept the original World Tag Team Championships, so SmackDown's GM Stephanie McMahon introduced a new set of belts in October 2002, and an 8-team tournament was announced to crown the first champions. The tournament gave Heyman the bases needed to cycle his workers through various combinations, while also giving fans a reason to keep tuned in every week. If you want to see how the tournament unfolds, you gotta stick with SmackDown. Let's walk through the major moments of the tournament, which many see as the best showcase possible for the SmackDown 6. We'll also look at key moments after the tournament too. The tournament kicked off on the 3rd of October, and immediately the tournament felt important thanks to Steph's opening promo and a tournament match kicking off the in-ring action. Los Guerreros beat Mark Henry and Rikishi to begin the broadcast, and other people in the tournament who were also part of the SmackDown 6 competed in singles matches. On this very episode of SmackDown, Angle and Edge got over 20 minutes for a singles match placed right in the middle of the episode, and along with this, Rey Mysterio vs Chris Benoit closed out the broadcast, and both matches were very good. So the message is clear, there's no time to take a piss break when watching SmackDown. On October 10th, the Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle partnership debuted officially as a team, beating Billy Kidman and John Cena via submission. Edge and Mysterio, meanwhile, beat Tajiri and none other than the WWE Champion himself, Brock Lesnar, via pinfall. This was a smart booking decision that mixed the WWE title into the tag team division to raise the stakes. We get to the semi-finals 1 week later. Angle and Benoit beat Los Guerreros in a 10-minute semi-final filled to the brim with physicality. Another match you should make sure you check out. Edge and Rey Mysterio took on Devon and Ron Simmons to advance from the other half of the bracket, and so the stage was set for No Mercy, October 20th, 2002 in North Little Rock, Arkansas. The final match of the tournament would feature Angle and Benoit taking on Edge and Mysterio to crown the inaugural WWE Tag Team Champions, and this match, for many, is the pinnacle of the entire SmackDown 6 story. Angle and Benoit won after a 22-minute barn burner, and it's one of those matches that's gonna forever hold up. I know I've said it a few times already, but it really is a match you need to see for yourself. One of those bouts you really can't put over how good it was using just words. Edge struggled to find words for it too when he said, "I think back to No Mercy and the tag match we had for the inaugural tournament, and it was Kurt and Chris against me and Ray. And it was just to be there with 3 other guys like that and just performing at that level, you know, you really can't explain it." Going beyond the tournament, on the November 7th episode of SmackDown, Edge and Mysterio got their rematch, and this would be a 2 out of 3 falls match that went over 24 minutes. The boys would beat Angle and Benoit to win the championships, and it was very good. 24 minutes of main event quality wrestling on free television, on a Thursday night no less. Remember too, just 6 months earlier, SmackDown was potentially getting cancelled by UPN, according to Paul Heyman. We move on to Survivor Series in Madison Square Garden, and the 3 teams, Angle and Benoit, Edge and Mysterio and Los Guerreros, met in a 3-way elimination match for the tag team titles. Los Guerreros won when Eddie Guerrero locked Rey in the lasso from El Paso and forced him to submit. So because Eddie and Chavo walked out of MSG as champions, this meant everyone involved in the SmackDown 6 had now had the tag team belts around their waists. Finally, on the December 5th episode of SmackDown, we've got a fatal 4-way number 1 contender match for the WWE Championship. Kurt Angle vs Chris Benoit vs Eddie Guerrero vs Edge. And I bring this up because this one helped transition these tag team players back into the singles main event picture. Angle won, he was now positioned for a WWE Championship program, and the match itself was also excellent. Again proving that tuning into SmackDown was a smart move for those who wanted to see pay-per-view caliber matches for free. In between all these matches, the SmackDown 6 could also be found tearing it up against each other and against other opponents, though I'd recommend checking out the tag team tournament, the No Mercy match, and the fatal 4-way number 1 contender match if you want to see some of the absolute best work from the SmackDown 6. So, the question is, if things were going so well, then what happened? Well, Heyman's creative approach, as brilliant as it wasn't always well received by his peers. Heyman wanted things to make sense week to week, while Vince wanted big moments and soap opera stuff, whatever's needed to get WWE to WrestleMania. These two philosophies could create great television, I'm sure, when they're in balance, two madmen bouncing off one another, but balance apparently was rarely achieved, and Heyman found himself getting stressed out by his superiors. McMahon overruled a lot, and while Paul was the SmackDown head writer, he was also reined in quite a bit, and he wasn't able to do what he always wanted to do. He was also quite sneaky, was old Paul Heyman. He told a story about listening into a Raw creative meeting via phone and getting caught red-handed. But all this just added fuel to the fire, and by early 2003, the creative disagreements had become serious enough that both Paul Heyman and Raw lead writer Brian Gewirtz were suspended for a week following a particularly heated creative meeting. In February 2003, Heyman was removed from his position as SmackDown's lead writer, officially transitioning to a consultant role, with WWE saying Paul was stepping back from the stress of full-time travel. A pretty poor excuse from WWE, if you ask me. Then there was also Edge's neck. Edge was pulled from the No Way Out 2003 card. He was supposed to compete in a 6-man tag alongside Brock Lesnar and Chris Benoit, taking on Team Angle. But instead, a backstage segment was produced where Edge was found attacked and incapacitated. So the match became a handicap bout, Lesnar and Benoit against Angle, Haas and Benjamin. The reason for Edge getting pulled, according to the man himself, was the fact that his body had been sending him warning signals for quite some time, and he finally decided to stop ignoring them. The diagnosis was severe cervical disc herniation, and the recovery kept him out of action for over 14 months. When he came back to WWE, the landscape had shifted quite a lot, and he ended up being drafted to Raw rather than returning to SmackDown, and this severed his last direct link to the original SmackDown 6. Edge still went on to have a Hall of Fame career that not only included the main event status he didn't have before the SmackDown 6, but it also included World Championships. He had become one of the company's premier bad guys, and he's now considered one of the best to ever do it. Other members of the SmackDown 6 also went on to have great runs after using this era as a launching pad. Eddie Guerrero became incredibly popular with his lie, cheat and steal persona, and at No Way Out 2004, he defeated Brock Lesnar to become the WWE champion. It's easily one of the most emotional championship victories in the history of the company. Chris Benoit won the Royal Rumble in January 2004. He went the distance from the #1 entry spot, and he won the whole thing to earn a world title shot at WrestleMania. He ended up jumping to Raw, and at WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden, he won the belt in a fantastic match against Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Benoit and Guerrero celebrated together at the end of WrestleMania 20. Two men who were laughed at when Heyman asked for them during a talent trade were standing as world champions on the biggest stage in wrestling. You really couldn't write it. It is a shame that the legacy of Chris Benoit, and in turn the importance of this very moment, is forever tarnished due to Benoit's actions. Kurt Angle remained in the SmackDown main events throughout 2003, having one of the all-time great SmackDown rivalries with Brock Lesnar, which included an Iron Man match on free television and a highly regarded showdown at WrestleMania 19. When we talk about the SmackDown 6 though, and what it meant for the Blue brand, the Iron Man match, I believe, is more important. Never would you have seen a 60-minute Iron Man match on SmackDown, let alone free TV, before this era. Rey Mysterio went on to legitimize the Cruiserweight division before getting his shot at the big time. He won the 2006 Royal Rumble and captured the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 22 in a victory deeply tied to his friendship with Eddie Guerrero. Eddie passed away in November 2005, so this match was Rey's tribute to his old friend, and from here, the legend of Rey Mysterio would continue to grow, culminating in a Hall of Fame career that's still going on to this very day. Chavo Guerrero became the Cruiserweight division's main heel throughout 2003 and 2004, and after an on-screen split from Eddie that would see the two men meet in the ring, he continued to be one of the most reliable performers on the roster. He didn't reach the heights of Angle, Benoit and others, but his talents were put to good use in other places, whether that be in movies and TV as a pro wrestling advisor or competing in the ring for different wrestling organisations. And as for SmackDown itself, it evolved. The departure of Brock Lesnar from WWE in 2004, combined with Benoit's move to Raw and the restructuring of both brands, meant that SmackDown had to reinvent itself once again. This time, the answer came in two forms. John Bradshaw Layfield repackaged as JBL, the Texas millionaire who had a 280-day WWE Championship reign, and another guy you might know, John Cena. He had been developing his character on SmackDown for over a year, and he finally broke through at WrestleMania 21 to win his first WWE Championship. The SmackDown 6 helped build the SmackDown brand for the next generation, and no longer was SmackDown simply seen as the Recap B show. All 6 men in the SmackDown 6 eventually became world champions. Edge, Angle, Mysterio and Benoit all held the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. Eddie Guerrero, Angle, Edge and Mysterio all held the WWE Championship. And I know some people wouldn't count it as a real world belt, but still, Chavo Guerrero won the WWE's version of the ECW World Championship. So while Heyman's initial idea behind the SmackDown 6 was to make SmackDown a better in-ring show compared to Raw, he also helped elevate each competitor he featured on his show. Speaking to Newsweek in 2004, Paul said, "One of the things that really clicked about the SmackDown 6 is that they weren't main eventers, they weren't perceived as main eventers." And then he said he could probably put together 4 or 5 rosters of SmackDown 6s with today's crew. And you know, he probably could. But in saying that, there was something about that specific environment back in 2002 and the way these guys could be viewed as underdogs against the other boys over on Raw. The lesson is pretty simple. Give great wrestlers time, give them opponents they can actually work with, and funnily enough, people might watch the wrestling show for the wrestling. When fans were getting fed up with Raw, Triple H and everything else they witnessed on Monday nights, they could check out SmackDown to see guaranteed good matches. And good matches equals good ratings. If you book them, they will come. The SmackDown 6 did not invent great TV wrestling, but it did remind WWE that if you give good wrestlers time, people will actually sit down and watch them wrestle. It's a mad idea, I know. Before the brand split, guys like Guerrero, Benoit and Edge were placed firmly in the mid-card and their TV time was limited, which in turn stifled their opportunities to show WWE audiences what they could really do. So in a way, Heyman pushing these guys on his version of SmackDown while giving them weekly, longer matches, it really helped set the tone for what weekly wrestling shows would soon become. But let me know what you think in the comments, guys, and I appreciate you watching this one. Please take care.